All right, John, I see your slides up and you're ready to go. You can take it away.
Thank you, Justin and Renata, and thank you everyone for tuning in to the webinar. I'm very excited to talk about this project. We've been working on it for a couple of years now, and we finally have the results to share with folks. So this project was really an evaluation of an electric bike pilot project that Kaiser and Drive Oregon did in the Portland metro region, and we did the evaluation of the program itself. Excuse me, I'm trying to get my slide to move forward. Thank you. So in general for this webinar, this is the outline I would like to present. First I'm going to talk a little bit about why e-bikes matter, and then what is an e-bike for the folks that have not ridden one or know that much about them, and then talk about the results of the pilot project. So first of all, why do e-bikes matter, and why are we interested in them? In Portland, and like many places around the country, we are trying to reduce our vehicles' miles traveled and to meet various local and national goals of both emissions or vehicle miles traveled. In Portland, we're looking at trying to increase bike up to 25% by 2030, and also reducing VMT by 30%. And so the question is, how do we get there from where we are? Currently, and this is data from 2012 American Community Survey data, and Portland now is cusping at about 7% of bike commuting in the Portland region. But as you can see around the country, the number of people biking for commuting is low. And so if we're trying to get people to bike more, how do we do that? So this is some work that both Roger Geller at the City of Portland started off looking at typologies or types of cyclists to try to understand how do we get these people to cycle more, but and also understand some of the barriers about why they might not cycle. Jennifer Dill and Nathan McNeil worked continually on what Roger set out to do, and basically confirmed some of his original feelings about the percentages of people that cycle or don't cycle. So for people that don't know that much about this typology, so for the strong and fearless, these are people that are very comfortable without bike lanes. The enthused and confident are very comfortable with bike lanes. Interested but concerned are not very comfortable but interested in biking more, and also not very comfortable currently cycling for transportation, but not interested in biking more. And finally, the people that are no way, no how, are physically unable or don't know how to bike, very uncomfortable on paths, and not very comfortable and not interested in cycling for transportation. So the question is, how do we really get these folks that are no way, no how interested in cycling, or the people that are interested and concerned, but concerned, also interested in cycling? So we're really looking at shifting these people. So there are barriers that people have to deal with to want to cycle more. Cycling can be difficult for people that, as they get older, people that live in hilly areas find it difficult to ride their bike. People that live greater than 5 miles from where they need to go, especially for work or employment reasons, feel that is a barrier. There are physical limitations that make cycling difficult. Women also tend to bike less than men, and women currently make around 25% of all bike trips in the United States, where in Asia, in other countries, that is 50-50, so there's more parity in cycling. People don't always feel safe, biking in traffic or, biking around cities. As many people that bike for work don't want to wear different clothes, they don't like to come to work sweaty, or don't have facilities at their employment centers to change or to shower before work. And then finally, as we all do in life, have to carry things, or we have families, how do you do that on a bicycle? So these are typically barriers that we see that people say that are reasons why they cannot bike or have difficulty getting on a bike for the first time. So the question here is, for this study, is we're looking at e-bikes, and can e-bikes be that gateway or a new type of bicycle to break down some of these barriers that I just went over and kind of shift that typology of somebody to a typology that is more interested or will actually use a bikes to commute or do other trips. So an e-bike is a bicycle. It typically usually looks like a standard bicycle, but it has a battery. It has some type of motor that can be either within the wheels or at the hub that help move the wheels as you pedal. And then usually there's some type of power control system at the handlebars to help make that motor go at different speeds. There typically are two types of e-bikes if you go out there and look at them. There are ones that are throttle-based that are more like a moped or a motorcycle, where you, at the controller at the handlebar, can adjust the speed or the amount of power that the bicycle is providing. Or there is what is called a pedalic. So that's a power assist bicycle that as you pedal, it recognizes the need to add power to your pedaling. Just in general, e-bikes, for the folks that don't see them often, the United States is kind of a new place for e-bikes to be in the marketplace. But if you look around the world, they are heavily used, particularly in Asia and Europe. So typically my research is looking at this question of, can e-bikes get more people to bike, and then also to get more people to bike more often. So that's why I was really excited about this pilot project and to be part of that, because it would help myself and others answer some of these questions, and also I think help policymakers and local practitioners look at ways in which e-bikes could help us meet some of those local goals of getting more people biking. So Kaiser Permanente joined with Drive Oregon to, as part of our Metro, which is our MPO here in Portland, Oregon, and for the regional travel options program, to pilot this e-bike program at their facilities. With that pilot project, Drive Oregon purchased 30 Curry iZip i3 compact bikes. You can see them here on the upper right. It is a as I showed pictures of the other e-bikes, it has a motor and a battery. The motor itself is in the front hub of the front wheel. It has a controller at the front, and here's a picture of that controller. It was similar to the picture I showed before. It has both throttle and also pedal assist, so it can be shifted based on this button to how you want to operate the motor. The top speed is 18 miles per hour, and it has a range between 15 and 20 miles for each battery charge, depending on obviously hills and how much throttle you're putting on it. The weight is about 42 pounds, and it is folding. And one of the reasons why Drive Oregon chose a folding bike was that it wanted to, as part of this project, to look at the first and last mile commuters of Kaiser employees and its connections to our transit system, TriMet. And so we thought that if you had a folding bike, you could use it better on either buses or on our light rail system. The project ran from May 2014 through October 2015. Here's the project team. Basically, folks at Kaiser and Drive Oregon were really responsible for the programmatic aspects of the project and getting people into the program and on the bikes. Bike and Hike and PSU Bike Hub were responsible for maintaining the bikes. Washington County Bicycle Transportation Coalition helped with training, as did Bike and Hike, and Curry Tech were the suppliers of the bikes. And then the PSU staff that did the evaluation. So overall, the outcome of the studies that we were looking at is, can providing people an e-bike get people to bike more often, especially to work? Do e-bikes let people overcome barriers to cycling? And can a folding e-bike expand people's use of public transportation and connections, such as the first and last mile? So as the methodology for doing this project, we had 6 cohorts of 30 bikes and 30 people in each cohort. For about 154 people were participants in the project. I should say that 10 of those folks did drop out, and as we look at the research and the results, we had 14 that didn't answer enough of the questions to be part of the analysis. So we, in general, are looking at a pool of about 129 folks as we look at the results. Participants were chosen by Kaiser through a sign-up that they did internally. Surveys that we conducted were pre-use, mid-use, and post-use, and incentives were given for completion of those surveys. Each person was given a bike for a 10-week period, and they could use that bike in any manner, though we were suggesting that they would try to use it for commuting, and gave them ideas about first and last mile, and gave them some training about where light rail and bus stops were. We did not require them to use the bike in any specific manner. Each person was, obviously trained on how to use the bike. They were given helmets, lights, locks, everything that you would need to bicycle, and then also we conducted some safety trainings for all the cohorts. Here's a map of the employment centers of Kaiser. There's a West Side Medical Center, a Lloyd District office complex, and then the Sunnyside Medical Center. The dots show the locations of where people lived and where they were commuting to in the metro region. So the demographics of the folks using that were participants in this were kind of heavily white, but we had a more than average split on female to male. 64% were female. The age distribution was what I think you would see in a typical employment center, where you had a range of younger to older professionals as part of our pool. Higher educational attainment and household income, I think because of the all working at a medical complex. Another thing to point out, about 23% of the people felt that they had some type of physical limitation that made biking difficult. And we recognize that BMI is not a perfect indicator for health status or someone's health, but on average, people BMI was 28, and in the optimal range for people that want to know is around 18.5 to 25. So as an indicator, they were a little above the optimal range of BMI. But in general, people kind of thought of themselves in good to very good health. Some more facts about them. The average household had 2.9 vehicles. Each household had about 2.8 bicycles, which I think is interesting as we look further at the results, that all these people did have, not all of them, but a majority of people did have access to a bike at their house before getting the e-bikes. And then the other thing I wanted to point out was that about 20% already had a monthly transit pass. So how far did people live from their employment center? The mean was around 11 miles to where they needed to, where they went to, so one of those 3 employment centers. And the means of getting to a transit stop were about 1.5 to 2 miles to one of those 2 types of transit, either bus or light rail. Mode choice. So we asked before, how did the people get to work and how they do other errands? And as you can see, a majority of the people, 69%, drove to work alone, and about 15% of those folks used public transit, and 7% were bike riders. When asked how they would describe themselves as cyclists, 22% said they bike regularly, 67% said occasionally, and 11% said never ride a bike. Most respondents, around 75%, stated they had a bike for commuting or biked for commuting and other activities as an adult in the past. However, only 39% of these had done so within the last 6 months, and 18% in the last month. In other words, about a fifth of the respondents had biked to work recently. About 8% were active cyclists, logging 10 or more bike commutes in the last month. Additionally, 67% had biked for recreation in the last 6 months. Overall, 40% of the respondents had biked at least once in the past month for either transportation to work or recreation. So if we look also a little bit by location commuting, we see that, and I don't know if folks notice in the map, the Lloyd Center is centrally located in kind of near downtown Portland. So it has many more transit options available to them, where the West Side and Sunnyside, which would be more considered suburban areas of the Portland metro region, you saw higher uses of driving alone, where in the Lloyd district you see more people using transit and have or bicycling. So when we're talking about barriers to cycling, we asked folks, both pre-use and mid-use and post-use, what do they see the barriers to getting on a bike? And what we found is that some of these, which such as weather conditions, are kind of across the board, kind of very much a barrier to people cycling. But also places like the distance is too far, triplets, can't carry what I needed to carry, don't want to go to work sweaty, and hills were kind of at the top of the list. But as we see, after they used their e-bike, we did see some shift where those barriers were diminished. Weather conditions, I look at that as maybe being one as, hey, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, or they didn't experience weather to be a hindrance for them to get out and bike. But where I see the distance too far and the hills and arriving to work sweaty, that's around about an e-bike. The e-bike is helps people get up hills. It makes going further distances easier, and then also not arriving to work sweaty. So we did see some shifts in attitudes about these barriers. Now, I do want to point out is that we also saw some increase in barriers where we had not seen them before. And I look at these as being either uncomfortable or concerns of safety or not having a place to store it, are aspects of actually bicycling. And once you start doing it, you might find some of these as actual barriers where you're starting to bicycle more and you might feel not as safe because you're experiencing it, or particularly around the transit connections, when they were trying to make transit connections with the bicycles, some people found it not as easy or convenient. One thing that I wanted to point out is that people felt that they had health concerns or physically unable to do that. As we look at some of the descriptions of those, there were folks that in cycling, and either they had to not cycle as much that because of their injury, or that they had a medical condition that made them not feel comfortable cycling. So I think that's why we see some of this increase. But I would like to get at that a little bit more as we look at this research more. So we also broke this down a little bit by male and female, so by gender. And as you can see that we do have some kind of similarities or some decreases in ideas of weather conditions as being a barrier. But when we look at this idea is that males going into the program felt that they didn't want to bike because they felt it was going to be too sweaty, where females were not as concerned about that. We did see both drops for both male and females after using the e-bike. Another barrier that we saw a significant drop was hills, and then we saw some separation between males and females, in that females felt that hills were going to be a little bit more of a barrier, but then you see significant decreases once they use the e-bikes. And then also we saw some of this increase of barriers around health concerns. And finally, as I pointed out before, increases in safety concerns, and this is where we saw some separation between males and females, where females did feel unsafe or had some safety concerns once they started to bike. Participants were asked several questions about how they were using an e-bike, their general experience, and feelings of safety. Participants were specifically asked how often they used an e-bike to commute to work and for other trip types. Over half the respondents reported using the e-bike to commute to work at least once a week, and over a fifth used the e-bike 3 or more times per week. This varied considerably with distance from employment center, as the likelihood of using the e-bike to commute to work at least once per week decreased when the respondents lived 5 or more miles from their employment center. Overall, the number of people commuting to work by bicycle at least once per week increased 19%. 50% of the participants used the e-bike for exercise or recreation or personal errands and visiting family at least once per week. So in this graph, I just wanted to point out is that the blue are before entering the program, and the green is after using the program. And this is where we kind of see some increases in or definitely increases in cycling. And as you can see, as we expect, that people that were participants did at least cycle at more than 1 day a month as we see that through the program. So one of the issues that we look at for getting more people to cycle is that 5-mile barrier that people feel that is too far to use a bicycle. What's interesting with the breakdown as we look at where the people lived and how often they biked is that we saw that the e-bike did get people to bike outside that 5-mile ring, particularly in the 5 to 10-mile ring, and then even greater than 10 miles. Though some people were outside that, only used it once per week, we did see some heavy increase here at the 5+ days per week outside the 5-mile area. So going back in the presentation, I talked about typology, and what we were able to do, which I think is the first time we were able to do this with using Roger Geller and Jennifer and Nathan's work around typology of cyclists, is actually ask people before and after the same questions about how they would interact with infrastructure or think about bicycling, and see if there was a shift in their typology. And what was interesting is that we feel that we did see a shift. So particularly in people that never biked before, so the first column is people that had never biked before and then occasionally and regularly. We were seeing folks that were in the no way, no how, interested and concerned, shift out into a more interested and concerned and more enthused area. So, for people that had never biked before and for people that occasionally biked before, we saw people become more confident in their cycling. Now, this can be directed to the program and actually using a bike and experiencing cycling. But I think what the main thing to point out here is that the e-bike is what got people into this program. And if you remember, people did have access to bicycles and before entering the program. But by giving them a bicycle, they were able to get more experience. And by that, getting that more experience, they became more confident in cycling and the potential to maybe cycle more often. So looking at trip purpose and trip frequency, the first area, the area in orange here, looked at the trip frequency that people said that they would do with a bicycle for different types of trip purposes, increased after post-use. So that in general, more people would say they would more likely bicycle for these types of trip purposes after using the e-bike itself. And what I found interesting in looking at this is that it was pretty steady around the commuting and doing personal errands and visiting family. But I also think we saw a very kind of significant shift in people more likely to use it for exercise and recreation. So we also looked at that likelihood of using a bicycle after using their e-bike by gender. And we did see some kind of split by gender where males in general would be more likely to use their bike and than females. And this is, I think, something worth exploring more around how do we get more parity in females cycling. We also asked folks around the perceptions of e-bikes versus other modes. E-bikes are better for the environment or for health than a car, transit, or a bike. And what was kind of interesting is that we saw shifts. So the brown is before, using the e-bike. The kind of greenish blue is after, and we saw shifts after using it that they were very much in belief that using or an e-bike or bicycling is better for the environment and than using a car, better for their health. We also saw increases in better for than transit. So people recognize that getting out on a bike is better for their health than being on a bus or being on light rail. But also we saw some increase in this idea of differences between a regular bike itself, and we're not really sure where that changes versus a regular bike. But my sense is, and we'll talk about it a little bit, is the idea that people feel that e-bikes are a lot of fun, and by having a lot of fun with that, they versus a regular bike, they feel that they might use it more, and so thus being better for the environment or better than their health. So we also asked folks to talk a little bit about the bike itself. Overall, 79% viewed the bike more favorable after they used it, while 20% viewed it less favorable. And and as you can see here, what they liked about it, what they didn't like about the e-bike. Many people were favorable of the different types of mechanisms that drove the motor, and in general the battery range of this particular bike. But we see a little less favorability in some of the aspects that are, I think, more kind of directed to this particular bike than e-bikes itself. So this was a folding bike. People did comment on it being difficult or unwieldy to fold or put together sometimes. The bike itself has only one gear. So without using electric assist, people felt that it was too hard to pedal, and also the weight, which I think will play into some stuff that we'll talk about a little bit later about transit use. So overall, user experience, most respondents somewhat or strongly agreed that e-bikes were comfortable, fun, and easy to use overall. Only a small fraction of respondents, 7%, had a poor or very poor experience overall riding the e-bike, where 70% had a good or very good experience. Over 3/4 felt the e-bike allowed them to go faster and further than a standard bicycle. 93% said they felt safe overall riding the e-bike, and 2/3 said they feel more comfortable riding in traffic on an e-bike than they do on a standard bicycle. In asking about purchasing a bike after using the bike, the price was definitely a barrier, and we see a willingness to pay for their e-bike here. we did see a shift that they were more willing to pay a little bit more after using the bike, but they felt that it was about $1,300 that they would be willing to pay for that bike, which it actually is what it basically retails for from Curry. But they did feel that the bike was worth the cost, but the cost was a significant barrier for them to want to purchase it and then use it. So in general, I think people were very happy, and we saw and heard a lot of comments about how fun it was. But when asked, are you going to go buy one, this price barrier is going to be an issue for people to get onto e-bikes. And I did want to just comment real quick about the fun aspect, in that when we look at trying to get people cycling more often, one of the things that we have seen in e-bike research is the general comment that people do find e-bikes as fun and exciting and very pleasant to ride. And what we feel is, as people are shifting these typologies, one of the things that will shift them is an enjoyment of the activity they do. So I think there are some opportunities and links here to thinking about how can happiness and fun get more people cycling, and is an e-bike that vessel or conduit to allow that to happen. I did want to talk about transit a little bit. Less than a fifth of the respondents tried taking their e-bike onto public transportation. Most of these cyclists suspended the bike from bicycle hooks or on light rail, or placed the bike on a rack in front of the body. Did enter the transit system. A quarter of those reported having trouble taking the e-bike onto transit, citing crowded trains, and also that the bike was too heavy and difficult to maneuver while putting it onto public transit. They also mentioned that trip logistics in connected transit made, especially bus, made it difficult for people to use bike in conjunction to transit to get to work. So that kind of idea of the first mile, last mile was problematic for people that did try to trip train. So the main conclusions, I think, what we saw in this project and from the results is that e-bikes reduce some of the barriers to participating in cycling. E-bikes may help people be more comfortable on bicycles. And finally, e-bikes encourage more trips by bicycle. Future work, in looking forward, we were extremely excited and very pleased to be part of this team, this project. But I think this project has just been to the right direction of future work. I think we would like to see to expand the understanding of trip and mode choice given an e-bike. Also to explore how route and destination choices are changed or enhanced by using e-bikes. We were not able to go that much into safety considerations of use. Are e-bikes more safe, less safe bikes? Are they more safe or less safe in different types of bike infrastructure? I think that is an area that needs to be looked at. Also, as part of that is also the conflicts with other pedestrians and cyclists on bike infrastructure. And then finally, the differences in different types of bike models. As we saw, some people were not that pleased with this particular bike. We would like to see how it might react to different types of models, non-folding or multiple gear e-bikes, but also there is a new class of e-bike called a speed pedelec, which goes faster than 20 miles an hour, and how those types of bikes could play into people's use of e-bike cycling. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge everybody that was part of the team, Metro's Travel Option Program and Caleb Winter there for funding the main program. Obviously Kaiser and all the participants of the project. In Drive Oregon, the folks there were the main program managers and were able to make sure that it went very smoothly. All the folks that did training and bike maintenance that kept those moving, Curry Tech for helping out with providing the bikes and any issues that happened during the program, and then finally my partners on the project of the evaluation, Jennifer Dill, Nicholas Coble, Zakari, Mumbai, and other staff here that help us work on these projects, and finally to NITC itself for all its help and support and resources. Finally, here's my contact information, and the final report is coming very soon. It will be put up on our project page, and if you do want a copy of that, feel free to email me, and I will make sure that you will be notified when that final project report comes out. Thank you.
Well, great. Thank you, John. Viewing the webinar, you can feel free to continue to submit your questions if you have them. We have a number of questions. The first one, John, gets to one of the last points you made about the bike itself, and that is, what was the process of choosing the e-bike model and brand for the pilot?
Yeah, that was done through a RFP with Drive Oregon, running that choice. I think the main thing that drove the choice of this particular model was the idea of first and last mile commuting, and making sure that the bike could be used for first and last mile aspects, and so that drove the folding bike. In looking back at that, Portland does not have any requirements like other cities in around the world and even in the country that don't allow bikes onto mass transit, both bus and light rail. So in understanding the feedback from participants, people didn't really fold them that much, and when they did find it somewhat difficult, and so that would probably be the kind of that, and the single gear aspect were kind of, as we've learned it by giving these out, were probably the two negative comments around the actual bike itself. The positive stuff were both the ability to use throttle and the pedelec part of it. I don't know what Drive Oregon would say about looking back at the bike, but I think in general that we could have gone with a standard bike, shape and model, and probably could have done the same type of project. But that was kind of the thought process of choosing this one bike.
And we had a couple questions regarding behavior of the participants. The first one here, how many of the study participants purchased an e-bike?
Yeah, we're still doing 6-month follow-ups, and I think we still have 2 more cohorts of folks to get a response back on that. We do know that there are 3 people that have actually bought an e-bike from the first 4 cohorts, and we don't know on the last cohorts.
Okay, and then another question had asked about the those follow-up surveys, so you had addressed that here, so I'll go to the next question here. Are you aware of any studies on how people on conventional bikes perceive people on e-bikes?
No, we don't. There has been some studies, Chris Cherry out of University of Tennessee, who is the only other person that I've known that's really done some of this type of evaluation of people riding different types of bikes and a conventional standard bike versus an e-bike. But I don't believe he looked at perceptions of regular cyclists to those e-bikes versus just comparing the different usage of those two bikes. But I think it is really important, and certainly when I am seeing news stories or listening to policy makers and local interest people, that people want to understand a little bit more. They feel that there is a concern, but we don't know of any real literature or research around those perceptions.
Okay, this question I think is dealing with that being a very particular type of e-bike that you used in the pilot, and asking you to if you think a more traditional style bike had changed the results. Do you think it would have changed the results if it wasn't that particular folding model with all of its peculiarities?
I don't think the folding aspect, because I don't think that was, I think people maybe just didn't fold it as much from what we see in people's comments. I do think that maybe the gearing could have changed some of the people there. As I said, that there were some folks that found that had negative opinions. There was only a few people, like 7%, had negative opinions about the bike. That could have changed those few people, but I think in general people had a very positive experience with riding this bike. But I think that's one of the things to look at is, do different types of e-bikes get more people interested in biking or have a experience in cycling?
Okay, and this question, did you look at the commute in terms of minutes or just miles? Like you had mentioned the five mile.
Yes, so just on distance.
Okay. Let's see, the last one I got up here is, can you tell me more about the No Way, No How group? Can one be in that category if they're willing to be part of the study?
That's a great question. There are issues, and I think that you state some of how can somebody be in No Way, No How and then volunteer for the program. But and I think that's a symptomatic of the actual survey structure itself. I think they would probably be more interested and concerned, but because of the way they answered certain questions, particularly around not wanting to or not feeling comfortable about biking on bike paths, puts them into this category of No Way, No How. I think you could shift them into that interested and concerned because they volunteered for the project, but in thinking of the survey methodology and the instrument that we used, it doesn't know that we are using people that are going to be part of a project. But I do think that's a valid point, that these are people that were interested in cycling and were in general just kind of curious about what it would be like for riding an e-bike.
Okay, here's another one. Are you planning to do more of this and the behaviors surrounding the use?
Yes, we would we would love to do more. We have some ideas for other studies, and I think I put some of the topic areas in the future work area of the presentation. We don't have anything booked right now, and our project started around this. We are looking at using some of the bikes that were used in the Kaiser project to maybe on another project soon, but nothing currently booked.
Okay, I think that is it. Questions here. So this concludes our webinar. If you have any specific questions for John, you could feel free to contact him at those numbers that he had provided there. Thank you for joining us today. Again, thanks to John for sharing your work. You can view other professional development offerings on our website, nitc.us. This concludes our webinar. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.